Question number 1. What thou lovest well remains, the rest is dross. What thou lovest well shall not be reft from thee. What thou lovest well is thy true heritage. Why do we focus so much time and energy on so many silly things when all that really matters is what one loves? Why can we not just be full of love and devoted to the things we love? Is it human nature to rend asunder rather than to join together? Are we subject to original sin, or is the doctrine of original sin, or is it the doctrine of original sin which still infects our minds? Can we not love purely, intensely in the moment and know that that itself is eternal bliss?
Yeah, the second part's about as poetic as the first part, but who is the poet that you're quoting?
The poet I'm quoting is Ezra Pound, and the second part is me.
The problem here is that we often focus on things we love rather than love itself. And we get carried away by the object and thinking it's the object that's important. And of course it's not.
There seems to be some confusion too as to what love really is.
That too.
I mean, some people love their car. They think they do anyway.
No, your point's well taken.
I guess what struck me about your question is when we focused all that really matters is what one loves. I would have perhaps said who or what, perhaps, but there's love. I think is interpersonal. I know there are lots of different versions of what that means. Agape is that's the Greek word for the love of God, isn't it? Which is distinct from erotic love and other kinds, romantic love.
Yeah, I mean, some love is just desires for things, external things of all manner. But I mean, the love that must be spoken of here is, of course, what is heartfelt. And I mean, by heartfelt, the center of the being. But
well, we could also place a little more time and energy and consciousness into expressing love, into the acts of love that we do make.
Right.
And make it more of a mindful activity to bring more of ourselves into play. Without that, love tends to be more of a like.
Well, I tend to think there are two things I wanted to say here. One is that for the ancient Greeks, love was personified as various gods and goddesses. You have beauty in the form of Aphrodite, and then you have, Cupid, you have Eros. But also, the other thing I wanted to say here is that, the act of loving itself is almost a spiritual practice. And yet, so often we become decentered, where we say, we love this, and so I'm going to do all of these things for my love. And then we spend so much time away from the thing we love because we're, building up all of these walls around us saying, I'm going to do this for the loved one or the loved thing or whatnot. And then it's too late. And I think the solution to that is, to be in the here and now and to have more respect for the present moment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed, for the present moment.
So Seda Badria occasionally recommends books to me, which I usually look into to some extent, sometimes read them. But the last two she recommended were, I think, the last books of Thomas Merton. One of them was called, the one I'm reading now, Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. And it's, in a sense, it's very short essays, or it's the sort of thing that he may have just made notes in a notebook, and I don't know, I didn't look to see if it was published posthumously, but it looks like the sort of thing that somebody might have gathered up from his leftover notebooks and pull together. And I'm about halfway through it at this point. But he really does focus on life as an experience. The good life, the Christian life, is a life of love, in which that's the dominant theme, the consistent theme of all of your sort of worthwhile experiences, grounded in love of others. Some of Christ's sermons talked about loving those who hurt you and despitefully use you and so forth, things that you wouldn't ordinarily think that you were capable of, loving your enemies and so forth. But I think Merton delves into that pretty seriously, and I guess is presenting a very strong case for that.
Yes, and that's one of the good aspects of Christianity, in the sense that if you take Christian non-dualism seriously, then you have to understand that your enemy is also God. And if you can't love your enemy, then you can't fully love God.
That's not easy.
Right.
I mean, just the fact that you categorize someone as the enemy.
Right. You are, if you've assumed that person or that thing as your enemy, then it's hard to love it, because it's created a separation between you and it to some extent. That idea.
I was just thinking, if someone is a true, authentic manifestation of evil, or you might say satanic, how could you love that, or that person who's truly satanic?
You don't have to love their actions.
Right. They do.
No, but the fact that they exist, unless you want to be a dualist or engage in Gnostic heresies, you have to understand that even that evil person came from the same source. And what they do is not because of it's not their substance, it's an accident, to use Aristotelian terminology.
Well, I never could really understand how, insofar as something is evil, or to that extent it doesn't exist, it has no principle in reality.
Exactly. There's some line somewhere in Ibn Arabi where he says, why do people talk about evil? Evil doesn't exist.
Yeah, because it has, everything that is or is created has to have a principle of its creation to some extent. And just to the extent that something doesn't have a principle, like, is there such a thing as ugliness, or is ugliness only the absence of beauty?
Okay, good point.
But there are bad people. I mean, there are people who do bad things and are motivated by not principle, but the absence of any good quality that we can perceive. And it doesn't help to say, oh, they don't really exist, or that what they do doesn't really exist, because bad things do happen and we see them. And
well, they don't have they're not, it is, you might say they are nothing in that badness to some extent. I mean, the worse that they have no principle of good.
Wait a minute, can I hear that again?
Well, I mean, when you say that something is bad, you're just asserting that it has no principle of goodness. It has lost that value.
Yes.
Lovable.
Yes.
Yet on the relative level, it may be suboptimum.
Right.
Now that we're, think about Hitler. So Hitler is generally accepted as, one of the worst people that ever lived, at least in the recent times. And so we sang that you could, if you encountered Hitler, you could and should love him, knowing what he's done or is planning to do, or despite all that, you could say, I love you, Hitler. I wish you wouldn't do those bad things, but...
No, I would say Hitler is kind of like a hailstorm or something. It's hard to imagine that it isn't tending towards nothing.
Utter chaos or something.
Well, yeah, and if there was someone on the street, some ranting homeless person screaming death to some group, would you have hatred for that person, or would you feel pity on them and want to love them and know that they're mentally ill? I mean, there's a lot of theories that Hitler was just really mentally ill, or that he had physiological problems, that his brain was by that time turned to Swiss cheese from late stage syphilis. And essentially, you can't blame one man. It was a historical phenomenon of an entire country, really an entire world, going towards nothingness, towards evil.
What is the statement that who the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad?
Yes.
And to some extent, Hitler, of course, ended up, killing himself?
Yes.
Historians say that.
So he annihilated self-annihilation to some extent.
Yeah, I think
so.
He and others went in some bunker in Berlin and he committed suicide. I don't know if the others did too. But
now think about it this way. If you believe in a deity that has the power of intentionality and is not the god of the deists, that basically creates a clockwork universe, and then he goes and sits in his lazy chair and watches it like some, episode of 60 Minutes or something on Sunday night. You have to believe that things in the universe are created intentionally, and that unless you believe in a demiurge, a second deity in a dualist Gnostic sense, then that everything that is good. Evil can happen, but evil is something that tends towards nothingness. The sign and symbol of Satan is not, a sign and symbol of something that has true ontological value, but is something pointing towards nothingness, the lack of life, the lack of spirit. And it's very easy and convenient, even within religion, to say, I don't like my enemy, or, I'll love my enemy now, but I'll be happy when they're roasting in the hellfire for all eternity. But why would a benevolent deity, like in Islam, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the benevolent, the merciful, why would a deity like that create something only to have it roast in a hellfire for all eternity? It makes no sense. Eschatologically speaking, if someone has tended towards nothingness, i.e. ontological evil in this realm, whatever may come of what remains of them, their soul afterwards, certainly will have to go through some levels of purification. But to say that it's eternal suffering is to deny justice to God, and deny love to God, and to deny the fact that God intended things to be in a certain way, and to say that God makes mistakes, all of which is completely absurd, and all of which are solved by looking at things mystically and non-dualistically rather than dualistically and exoterically.
Well, I always thought that hell, the only reason that you could call it eternal is because it is a possibility, not of being forever. It's a possibility. It is always a possibility which may be manifested in some degree or another. But in fact, to think that hell is eternal places it at the same level of the Creator.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't see that is possible. I think all that can happen is that something can tend to be nothing, but that's it. And self can't be eternal.
What does the Quran say? It says everything perishes except the face of God.
So I was thinking of Lucifer as being created by God as an angel, and apparently there's a hierarchy of angels. I gather he was a high-ranking angel, but he refused to bow down to Adam out of self-pride or something, and therefore rebelled and was cast out of the celestial realm. So, but he's nevertheless a creation of God. He's just, you might say, the dark side.
Well, if we were created by God to never make a mistake and to always be good, we would be nothing but robots.
Exactly. That's the difference between us and machines. That's why we can attain salvation and a machine cannot. Additionally, to say Lucifer's the dark side or Lucifer had self-pride is to look at it exoterically. It was Halaj, I believe, who said Lucifer is the greatest of all monotheists.
Did Halaj say that? I hadn't heard that, but
he is the only God in his own mind. I guess he is everything else.
Yeah, I mean, if Lucifer failed to bow down before Adam, he did it not out of self-pride, according to Halaj, but because he said, I'm not going to bow down before creation. I'm going to bow down before the source of creation.
Say that again, please.
According to Halaj, Lucifer, it's not out of pride or arrogance. It's that he refused to bow down before creation, saying, no, I'm not going to bow down before creation, something ontologically lower than the Father. I'm going to bow down before the source of creation.
Well, he can't be bowing down to the source of creation if he does not adhere to God's wishes.
Well, it's the difference between opinion and action. A number of Sufi orders actually, like the Malamatya order, also do believe that Iblis is blameless.
Iblis being Satan.
Yes.
Well, if he's blameless, it would be because he considers what he is doing to be the will of God.
But as the story is given, he and the other angels were ordered by God to bow down to Adam, to acknowledge that Adam had a higher rank in the sort of order of being than the angels. And the refusal to obey God, it doesn't make him, he can't be blameless for that, can he?
Well, it's we're talking about what does he conceive himself to be, not necessarily whether he is that.
Well, there's also the question of if angels were created according to, Islamic cosmology without free will, then you have to understand that if Iblis chose to not follow God's will, then it was because God didn't want Iblis to follow his will, because there's a certain plan, a divine plan for Iblis. There's another interesting and fun saying that basically said, Iblis, should be honored because he does all of God's dirty work. He performs an ugly function that he really doesn't want to do, but he does something necessary.
Well, he really is attempting something that is not possible. And it seems to me, that's he can only pursue it so far, but it's not possible.
Well, if Iblis,
if he's so intelligent, does he not realize it's not possible?
Yeah, if Iblis was disobeying God, then he must have had free will to that extent. But you're saying it only appeared that he was disobeying God, that he was following what God intended.
Yeah, you can't I don't think you can have it both ways, that he's an angel with no free will, and then on the other hand, he's making choices which implies that he has a free will. He's being
Well, all of this mythology is very interesting, but how does it apply to us? I mean, here and now, what lessons do we are supposed to draw from those stories or history?
Well, how did we get onto this from love? I was asking about love, and we're talking about Satan.
Yeah, well, I've forgotten. But we got there. We could go on to one more question, maybe, or at least start it.
Well, you would, if you wanted to put this in terms of love, does Satan disobey God because of his love of God, or does he disobey? I never got that impression from him, from any of his actions, that his whispering to people is trying to tempt Christ to turn the stones into loaves of bread, his so on and so on and so forth. It seems like to me he's set himself in opposition to God's will some way or another. Either it's because he can't do anything otherwise because that's the way he is, or
his job is to be the trickster and to test people.
That's right. Interesting. But I don't believe, ultimately speaking, that all of the things that can be conceived of as possibilities of evil and bad ultimately end up being, to some extent, nothing.
Now, could you say that again?
I think all these possibilities are directions that people can take that you might say their total and complete manifestation is not possible, because in fact they tend to be nothing or towards nothingness. So they can never be totally manifested. They can only be intentional, perhaps.
But whose intentions are we talking about here?
Well, I'm talking about the individual person. For instance, a person may intend to control the world, like the Antichrist, but it is not possible. And because he tends towards nothing, and nothing can't control anything. It isn't a possibility of manifestation.
So I was thinking of the story in the Gospels about Christ going out into the desert for a 40-day fast retreat and so forth, and encountering Satan, who says, give up this nonsense you're on, and I will make you this very powerful worldly leader. I mean, tempting Christ to deviate from what Christ thought God had called him to do. But you're saying, I think, there was no chance of Satan succeeding at that.
I mean, Christ is not going to follow him because he understands that is an intention which cannot be.
And that also gets into some very, very, very deep stuff that I really don't want to get into now. Like, on the one hand, you could say, well, Christ is one person of the Trinity, so he couldn't have followed Satan. Another school of thought says, yes, but Christ, in order to fill his mission, had to be fully human and fully divine. And as part of being fully human, he technically could have listened to the serpent. None of that really matters. What I'm trying to get at here is the question of love. And to get back to Pound, he says, what thou lovest well remains, the rest is dross. What thou lovest shall not be reft from thee. What thou lovest well is thy true heritage. And I would say that even for someone evil, whether it's Genghis Khan or Hitler or someone else who we consider as totally evil, their legacy is not their hatreds. Their legacy is what they love. And if they didn't love anything, then that's their loss, and their path towards salvation after death is going to be much more difficult, as symbolically expressed in the Inferno. But the point is, we tend to have all of these pet peeves and annoyances and hatreds, and ultimately that all is going to fall away eventually. The important thing is what we love, what we shower our love upon, and what we love, because the things we love are the things that are beneficial for our soul, and the things we show love to are the things that are benefited from our time here on earth.
I like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't even think that in the ultimate sense there is anything to the idea of a pure evil that can be loved.
I don't think you need to love pure evil. I think you need to love things that exist, and pure evil is ontologically nothingness.
Right. I mean, it's so you might say it's self-defeating.
Right. And if someone tends
In
toward
every respect.
and if someone tends towards evil, it means that they're going towards nothingness. But you also have to be very, very careful about that. Then you get into this whole thing, hate the sin, love the sinner, which is completely ridiculous. You shouldn't even be differentiating. You should say simply, you love the person. End of story. If a person tends towards, evil in one way or another, then ultimately that's between that person and their God.
You have to consider that as long as they do exist, there is the possibility that they can change, or that a change can occur.
And that your love for them might be what makes that happen. Or
so you can love that possibility, perhaps, but you certainly could not love the idea that they are nothing.
Right. In fact, in the Orthodox Church, one of the great saints of the Orthodox Church was someone who was a murderer and highway robber, but who ended up robbing a monk and was about to kill him. And the monk showed him absolute, pure, unadulterated love. And it changed the person's outlook entirely. And he ended up giving up everything and becoming a monk himself and a great saint.
Well, that's kind of the story of Jean Valjean, or in Les Miserables. He stole bread for his family, and he stole the silver goblet of the church from the priest who had taken him in and fed him and was taking care of him. And when the police came to arrest him and take him to the galleys, the priest said, "No, he didn't steal that. I gave it to him." And that had a huge effect on his outlook. Fairly interesting.
Yes, wonderful story. And a great play, a great musical, I might add.
Right.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel.